Yeah, I am on, but I'm having some difficulty actually seeing the screen, but I could kind of talk you through it a little bit if you tell me what you're looking at any one time.
Okay, I'll just name your plants as they come on the screen and you can tell us.
Yeah,
about
that
them.
would be great.
Will that work?
Super, yeah.
Okay, I will do that. So I'm going to start the share.
Yeah.
Okay, so we're going to start our plant share tonight.
Okay.
And first up, we have the Iochroma.
Okay. Yeah. So that is a tender plant. I actually grow it in a hoop house, and it sort of dies back in the winter. It's a member of a sort of the Solanaceae from South America, and it grows all the way down to Argentina. It's kind of, it's a beautiful thing to look at. Apparently down there, it's very popular with hummingbirds, but I suspect there are no hummingbirds here that have long enough bills to get in there. But anyway, kind of an interesting plant to look at. Shall we go to the next one?
Anybody have any questions about or comments about the Iochroma? Okay, moving along, we have Phlomis purpurea.
Okay, so this is it's an eastern, southeastern Mediterranean plant that many of you are familiar with. It just happens to be very beautiful right now. I'm not sure this.
Imagine if you got two solar bars.
Sorry.
Not harvested, and you stack them on top of each other.
I didn't hear that.
Go ahead, just continue.
Yeah.
Oops. Sorry, I just hit the wrong person. Unmute yourself, please. Sorry. Ben, can you unmute yourself? Ben, can you unmute yourself?
About them.
Okay,
No,
I think we lost Ben. We'll move on and maybe come back to him. This was his rose. Ben, are you with us again? Okay, move on to this was Judy.
So this is a Brodea laxa, and the reason I'm showing it is it's a Butte County form, which is about 12 inches tall. And what was I going to say about this? Oh, I originally bought the bulb from Telos Rare Bulbs. After I'd seen it, one of our members, Jackie Doda, brought it to one of the Western Hort meetings a long time ago. And so I liked it, so I went ahead and ordered the bulb. I killed the bulb, but I was able to save some seeds. And I went ahead and was able to propagate it. And this is the first year it's bloomed. So I was pleased. It's a perennial bulb, summer dormant. It does flower in late spring, and it has very large open umbels of these sky blue flowers. And it grows from central to northern California. Let's see.
Judy, how long did it take from planting the seed to flowering?
Oh, I have to look. I'm guessing it probably took about 4 or 5 years.
Okay, thank you.
All right. Any other questions? Okay.
not exactly instant gratification.
Okay.
Well, this is-
Okay, on the left is Dudleya burtonii, and this is also known as a giant chalk Dudleya. I got it at Annie's years ago. It's perennial. It's a native California Dudleya, and it is evergreen. It flowers in the spring to summer with very long arching flower stems that will have yellow flowers on it. And it can get up to 18 inches across. I would say mine's is probably 11 or 12 inches across right now.
Wow.
It's more tolerant of garden conditions than some of the other dudleas, so it does get occasional water. And it does need full sun on the coast, but part sun inland, because it only gets morning to early afternoon sun in my garden. And it's hardy to about 15 degrees. I made a last minute addition to this and added the Lathyrus odoratus coupanii, or coupani actually. And this is in tribute to Elizabeth Garbett, who used to comment whenever I brought him in May that she loved the sweet pea. This is an heirloom sweet pea from, hello, somebody's on. Anyway, from Italy. It was discovered by Sicilian monk, Father Francis Coupani in 1695. So it's a very old one, and it's very fragrant. It is one of the most fragrant sweet pea I think I've ever had. It's sometimes confused with Matacana, which is a more modern version, I guess, than has larger flowers. But this one is always, I let it reseed. It's not really terribly reseeding, but the fragrance is just incredible. And I'm hoping one day that Zoom will be able to bring scent as well as sound and pictures to your screen.
Wonderful.
And next. This is the one I'm really excited about. Some of you may have seen this was at Annie's annuals, and this is called Digitalis purpurea monstruosa, and it's huge. This is a biennial, short-lived perennial, but does self-sow to true, and it needs bright shade. It gets morning sun in my garden, average water, richish soil. Now, this is what's called a rare peloric mutation, Peloric. And I looked it up, and a friend saw this flower, and she said she thought, oh, those nursery industry folks, they've messed up her beloved old-fashioned foxglove. But I looked up a peloric mutation, and it was described early in the 1800s. So normally, the indeterminate fluorescence grows taller until the stem's unable to support more, and then the flowers open sequentially from the bottom. When a plant like this has peloric mutation, it normally develops an indeterminate inflorescence that steadily grows taller until the stem is, oh no, sorry, wrong side. Let's get the other side of it. The peloric mutation is a term for a flower that develops and opens before other buds below it. And the bloom on the top then stops further growth above that point. And there's something called Mendelian recessive gene. If you want to know more about it, I can give you a website that you can read more about it. But Digitalis in particular is one of the genuses that sometimes will have this peloric mutation.
Was this grown from seed, or was it cutting propagated?
From seed. It does. Oh, it's true to seed. I was reading it. It said if you have a purpurea monstrosa crossing with another monstrosa, you will go ahead and get the peloric mutation. If you have the monstrosa and you have a normal digitalis next to it, it'll look normal, but it will carry that gene that causes a peloric mutation, and it's a recessive gene that can get expressed in the F2 generation.
Wow.
Kind of interesting.
Judy, do the lower flowers open up then as well?
Yeah, they do, but they
Upward.
don't.
Upward.
Yeah, yeah. So the top bloomed first, and
But it's facing up, right? Or
yeah, yeah.
and
it's
so will
funny,
the other ones, because normally they kind of bloom facing down. So will these open up, actually go up and open?
You mean the lower flowers?
Yeah. Or did they will?
Kind of go out. Kind of like they are right there, kind of a little bit down, but they more go out. They don't come up.
Because I mean, that's really open. It almost looks big as like 5 flowers
You mean the top
Top
flower?
one.
Yeah,
Yeah,
the top flower is probably about 3 inches across. And it's funny, I just went out and took a picture. Another one bloomed today, and the coloration of the flower was much different than this one. But I don't know why that is, but I understand that this Purpurea monstrosa also comes in white and kind of a cream color, and then this pink and kind of a lavender. So I guess there are some different flower colors too.
Does the top match the other flowers, I assume, though? I mean, if you have
You
a purple
mean-
top, you'll have purple tubes underneath it.
Yes, yes, yes. Although I have to say, well, yeah, the one I'm actually looking at right outside my window right now. The other one that just came into bloom is a much darker flower, and the inside is much darker. And you're right, the flowers beneath it are also darker.
I think that was your last one.
I think so.
Oh, no, you have Philadelphus.
Oh, yeah, I was asking, and this is, thanks, Janet. So I'm growing this one on the, I guess, left. And I got it and it had the tag Goose Creek on it. But I was really wondering, because Goose Creek is supposed to be a double flower. I've never had double flowers on my plant. So I was wondering, and Janet was able to tell me that her Goose Creek is a double flower. So it's likely that actually mine's is actually Covello. And it's also known as mock orange. Folks probably know the plant. Perennial, semi-deciduous, flowers in the late spring to early summer, and it gets part morning sun, mostly a little bit of water, but mine has never bloomed double, and it lives at the edge of the redwood tree. So it gets morning sun, afternoon shade. And I think the redwood duff kind of keeps the soil moist and well drained because it's very floriferous and it scents the whole yard.
I guess it could also be the straight species you have. But I don't know.
How can you
Straight
tell?
species is also single, so hard to say.
Hmm.
one is
Anybody
selected, one's not.
Anybody a Philadelphus expert here?
Dee,
Like
how often do you
where?
water it?
You know what? I water it. Let's see. It gets by mostly on rainfall. And like I said, because it's under my redwood tree, I think it does stay moist because all the redwood duff. But I probably give it this past winter, probably every couple of weeks, I went ahead and gave it some water because we weren't getting any rain. But I actually don't water it much in the summertime at all. Maybe it'll get a spritz when I'm watering something else nearby, but I don't water it.
Same as on mine. I don't water mine either.
Yeah,
They might get overspray from areas around them, but they don't.
right. Yeah.
Don't get water.
And yours is fragrant as well, right?
Yes.
Okay.
Okay, Ben, sorry, I will go back to your rose. Sorry, I muted you. My mistake. Here's your rose.
Ah.
Ben? Ben, are you with us? I saw he was unmuted. He was with us a minute ago. Okay, maybe we won't hear about his rose. We will go on to
It's like a fragrant one though.
Leslie.
Okay, so this is agave vilmorinana, which is the octopus agave, and I have 2 in my garden, and 1 is blooming. And so it's been really fascinating to watch this flower stalk grow. So you can see on the left is one that I have in the back that is not blooming, and it gets about 3 to 4 feet high and about 5 feet wide. And it's nice because it doesn't have spines or anything on the leaves. So it's great for a lot of gardens, although it's a little big, but still rather safe. And it's the one in my front yard started blooming. And unfortunately, I should have taken pictures when it started, but we've done some progressive ones, as you can see with the dates on there. And it is just amazing how quickly that stalk grew. So I would say it took about 3 weeks to get about 12 feet tall. And then it's gone about up to about 14, I think it's 14 feet, 8 inches is where it's at now. And then what was also really fascinating was the progression of the flowers and how they opened. So you can see on the March 31st picture, the flowers that are open are just that little patch of yellow, and that's facing south. And it stayed that way, and it kind of went up. And you can even see on the 23rd, it's still mostly on the south side. And then they eventually opened up around to the back. And I would say the top 2 feet still is not open yet. It's from Mexico, and they say they like full sun, but as you can see, my front yard has very large trees. And so it gets some afternoon sun and mostly morning shade. And then the one in the backyard gets mostly morning sun and the rest is afternoon shade. So it can take, I would say, half day without a problem of sun. Low water, good drainage like most succulents. This particular agave, even though it's monocarpic, so it is going to die, does not propagate by sending out pups. So it's going to send out so the flowers, once they're pollinated, and I have seen bees, I looked it up and it says it attracts birds and hummingbirds. I have not seen either coming to mind. So hopefully the bees are pollinating it, and then I will get little plantlets. It looks like maybe thousands of them. If they're well pollinated, will drop off, and then they can be planted. So if anyone would like to have some of these, maybe hundreds, you're welcome to contact me, and I will get you some babies when it's finished. But it's been a really fascinating process to watch the growth, and I don't know how much longer it's going to take for the flowers to open and then for the plant itself to die, but the leaves have started to look yellowish, and you can see they're going more flat. So I'm guessing maybe another 3 to 4 weeks and it might be gone, but that's a guess. I haven't been through this before.
Now, an interesting thing about Leslie sent me this plant for our plant share, actually exactly a day after I'd sent an email to Richard Hayden, who works at the Natural History Museum in Long Beach or in Los Angeles, because I was down to Long Beach last week and saw this plant in a neighborhood there. And then we saw it at the Natural History Museum, and I didn't know for sure which agave it was. So if I had just waited till Leslie sent me this, I would have known, but.
Yeah, and I originally got it from.
It was a day late, but I did find out about the bulbils and the plant dying from Richard also.
Yeah. Yeah, I got my
I think
original
it's a- I
plant
think
from
it's a
Cherry
little-
Hall.
I think it's a little frost tender also. I think it only goes to like 30 degrees.
It's growing in
I'm in a cold spot. I definitely get into the high 20s. So at least that is fine.
Okay. Okay, we're gonna go back to Ben. I think we have it with us now.
Can you hear me now?
Yes,
Okay.
we're on your rose.
Yeah. So the interesting thing about this rose is it's actually a root called the De la Riferai. It's from a Weber patent in 1845. And I originally planted standard roses, and they since died a long time ago, but the rootstock kept going. And as you can see, in this case, it's grown into this Chinese pistache tree, and it puts on a great show at this time of year. It is scented, but it doesn't, it doesn't last a tremendous amount of time, maybe about a month maximum, and it doesn't flower again. But I thought it was kind of interesting. So I'm probably bad because I tend not to rip things out, and as a result, we have this beautiful show here.
It is very nice. Thank you.
Ben, you didn't talk about the Phlomis. You got cut off just beginning.
Yeah, the Phlomis. Okay, so yeah, the Phlomis is I think it's purpurea, but I think it's it could be slightly a subspecies or something, because it has this little bit of white on it. But the beauty of this plant is it needs virtually no attention whatsoever. It comes up regularly year after year, no irrigation. And it comes from a climate, I think, very similar to ours, where certainly the way it's going to be in the near future if we're not already there.
And
Do you
some-
hard prune it in January, in the early fall?
I do prune it back a little bit if it gets a little leggy, but other than that, not too much.
Prune mine back pretty hard actually after bloom, maybe by a third to a half actually, and
Yeah.
it comes back very well.
Yeah. Okay. Good advice.
For those of you who didn't see it, Anna put in the chat that she got one of those recently at Ladera Nursery in Los Altos.
Yeah, and they actually had just pruned it to about 1 foot high.
Hmm.
Interesting. Yeah. They're more. I also have the other one, the yellow one, the so-called Jerusalem sage, and that gets absolutely zero attention, and it comes back as well. So it seems like, not only do we have our native sages, but we've got some of these Southern European sages that could be a great addition to our ever drying world.
Anything else on the sage? We will move on, and I need to scroll through to Nancy. You ready, Nancy?
I am. So I'm not really a rose person, but I do have a few. And I thought it would be interesting to show the difference between the rose mermaid on the left and happenstance, which is on the right. Mermaid can make a shrub that's the size of a Volkswagen van. And happenstance is probably, well, it's a lot smaller, maybe 3 feet across and tall if you let it go, maybe a little bit bigger. Happenstance is supposed to have come from mermaid, and there's a number of different stories. I interviewed Barbara Worrell about it one time, and one story was that it was a chance seedling. One story was that the house it was growing at burned, and then this came up. I don't know I don't know if anybody knows the true story any longer, but they're both beautiful roses, and they're actually both very attractive even when the petals fall. It leaves the stamens in the center, and it's really pretty. The thorns on both of them are awful. And every time I do cuttings, I'll stick the cuttings and then I'll pull my hand away and it pulls out half of the cuttings from the sand flat because the thorns, and then I remember I have to cut all the thorns off. But
Yeah, I have a comment about that. I have one in my yard, and I'll attest to the fact that it grew to be about 20 feet tall, growing over an enormous pine tree. It's one of the most vicious roses I've ever come across. It has these downward facing, very sharp thorns. And I cut it down to maybe just the main trunk is there. And I call it a trunk because it's 4 or 5 inches across now. And it, of course, is now coming back and has started shooting off new growth. But it is attractive. I'll agree with you on that one.
yeah, dangerous. The Daphne is one that my dad always grew. It may be Daphne jasminea, but it is not fragrant. It's a wonderful little rock garden plant. That, what you see of the foliage and flowers there is probably 3 inches across.
Wow.
It's a real tiny thing. It's difficult to take cuttings from because the new growth is very short and it tends to bloom constantly. But I listened to a Rock Garden Society conference a year ago in June, I think it was. And the time to take cuttings of that is the beginning of July. So I'm going to give it a try. and see if I can get some more going, because it's everybody who sees it. I have one in a pot. I probably shouldn't say it, but everyone who sees it tries to buy it. And I have to keep saying, no, I can't. But yeah, it's a beautiful little plant.
Adorable. Is it fragrant?
No fragrance at all.
Okay, I think that completes our plant share. I will stop that. And moving along, I will introduce our speaker, who is Steve Fennimore. He is an extension specialist and weed scientist from UC Davis Salinas, and maybe he can explain that to me because I wasn't sure about that. I didn't know UC Davis had a satellite in Salinas, but apparently it does. And then also he has a PhD in weed science that he received from Purdue in 1997. And since then, he has been conducting research on weed management in coastal flowers, vegetables, and strawberry production. And he specializes in non-chemical weed management. So I will turn it over to Steve.
All right. Good evening. Can you hear me and see my slides okay? Yes?
Yes, it looks good.
Okay. Well, thank you. Probably I have this a bit basic. You are obviously a lot more sophisticated horticulturally. So some of the stuff I'm going to tell you is very simple, will be very simple for you. So weeds, most of which I'm talking about are plants. So what are we talking about when we are talking about weeds? And what are the damage that weeds cause? It's a little bit subtle. Weeds have benefits. They're not all, what they do is not all detrimental. We talk a bit about classification, and you people have obviously have a lot of background in botany. And so this will be really simple. The reason that's important, and I won't talk about it this evening, I won't talk about herbicides, but it is important to know exactly what species of weed you have when you're using an herbicide, because plants do not act the same way, do not respond the same way. So we'll talk about some control principles and methods, and all I'm going to talk about are physical and cultural methods of control. And these are all going to be focused on home garden situations, although I will bring a lot of examples because I work in primarily in commercial agriculture. And so there's a lot of commonalities. It's just on a bigger scale. So what is a weed? There are many definitions. Plant out of place, where it's not wanted, any plant other than the crop. That's true in a lot of places, that volunteer crops can become weeds. In a ecological sense, they're rootaroles, which are invading plants. They've naturally evolved over the eons to, when there's a landslide, for example, in a hill or a mountain or a fire, they invade the area. They're the first plants, and they do a lot of benefit because they prevent erosion and lead to eventual succession to the climax species. So the damage that weeds cause is rather subtle. It's subtle compared to plant pathogens, which cause rather dramatic plant collapse. I'm sure you're unfortunately aware of that. And of course, insects and animals cause rather dramatic damage to plants as well. The weeds are much more subtle because it is a competition for resources. So weeds are plants, and they need many of the same things that our flower and garden plants need. I use a lot of vegetable examples, so not so many flowers, more vegetables, because I work in vegetables, primarily lettuce and tomato and spinach, and those are some of the more common, broccoli and such. So weeds are competing for space, and of course they need to photosynthesize, and so they need sunlight, they need carbon dioxide, and they need water, and they also need the nutrients, the nitrogen, the phosphorus, potassium, and the micronutrients. And so they're competing for all of that with the crop or flower or whatever your desired species is. So competition occurs when the carrying capacity of a given area, and that could be a flower pot, it could be your garden, it could be your lawn, it could be a lettuce field. It happens on different scales, but it's when the capacity exceeds, the space is full, and that's when you get competition. So if you drive across the country, there's about 90 million acres covered by this crop, field corn. And it's a very, and you guys know what C4 plants or C3 plants and C4 plants. C4s are tropical species that can pull a lot of carbon out of the air very quickly. I like to show young children the comparison between the bean and the corn, where they're not touching, and where the corn actually kills the bean plant by stealing all of the carbon dioxide. And so it's a very efficient and very competitive plant. Whereas onion, another crop I work with occasionally, is not competitive at all, because onion has that upright, you know, those are green onions, and they're getting close to what should be harvest. Well, this is the plot that was not controlled, where the weeds were not controlled. And so you can see that, and so sunlight can go all the way down to the soil surface. And so the weeds can flourish there if they're not controlled. So onion is the exact opposite of the field corn, very uncompetitive. So this is what's going on. Let's see if I can get my laser pointer. Okay, so if this is the crop, the desired plant, and this is the weed. And so a lot of what's going on is above ground, competition for light and CO2 and water. And then the most serious competition is underground, where it's also competing for soil moisture, but then all of the various nutrients that plants all need. So transplants, in the vegetable world, they're becoming more and more common because the technology is becoming available to mechanize this process. And the costs are so high that we need the time saving. For example, a tomato plant that's planted, a 40-day-old plant, it's less time in the field, less irrigation water. Lettuce is even going that way. Traditionally, California was all seeded. So, and the case I'm making here is the tomato plant is much larger than the weed. And so we now have the mechanical robotic technology to quickly differentiate that based on the machine can see the difference. And this is one thing that I do work on are robotic weeders. And so the difference between the transplant and the weed is significant. It's just as valuable in your own garden, whether you're talking about tomatoes or flowers. So there's other damage. It's not just competition. The weeds can be host to insects, pests, aphids and such, which can vector light flies, which can vector viruses and other diseases. They provide cover to rodent pests, such as an artichoke, where the voles can cause significant damage to the artichoke, and there are weeds, and I'll show you a couple of pictures of those, that provide a lot of food for the rodents, and they can build up to high populations and chew on the artichoke buds, which of course the farmers do not like. Weeds are allergens. Lots of, I'm struggling with that myself now with all the pollen in the air. Weeds can be poisonous to livestock, especially cattle are quite sensitive. Goats are much less sensitive. Poison oak, which of course is a California native, but when there's a high poison oak population, taking a hike through that thicket of poison oak is not a good idea for most people. And then of course there's the old weeds are ugly. Of course that is relative. I've been accused of saying a lot of bad things about weeds, so I respect the challenge, and I talk a little bit about the benefits of weeds. They can basically cover the ground quickly. The rooteroles, such as wildfires, which unfortunately we had near my house last summer. But even though we only had 5 inches of rain, the ground is amazingly, the ecology here is amazingly resilient, although it's drying out very quickly. Food for wildlife, that's an obvious one. Things like deer can eat so many things. They can be very attractive, such as the mustards in the vineyard fields. They can add beneficial organic matter to the soil, cause nutrient recycling. And then this is common purslane, which is Portulaca oleracea, and it actually is loaded with vitamin B12, and it's a common food in India. Although there are vegetable varieties of this, it is a nutritious dish. There's a number of weeds which could be eaten. Believe it or not, even burning nettle. Don't eat it raw, but when it's steamed, it tastes like a very tasty spinach. So, talking about California climate, we have weeds all winter and summer. There are some categories of this. There are winter annuals. Those are the ones that are flowering now, like the wild oat up on the hills. Then there are summer annuals, which are coming on now, and we'll talk a bit about those. Then there are biennials. You were just talking about biennial ornamentals. We have biennial weeds, not a lot of them. And then we have perennial weeds, which are the bad guys. Some of them are horribly difficult to manage, and I will point those out to you. So the annuals, normally I teach this to a master. This course I'm giving you a synopsis of. I normally take about 3 to 4 hours, and where we actually look at all of these weeds. But I'll give you a quick overview. The summer annuals, things which are coming up now, I've seen just about all of these. Pigweeds, there's a number, this is Amaranthus, there's a number of species, and lamb's quarter has been around for a while. Purslane is coming up. Spurge likes gravel walkways. I have it on my own backyard. Crabgrass, knotweed, and things like sunflower, which of course can be an ornamental. Then there are winter annuals, which these guys are kind of at the end right now. Common chickweed, the yellow mustards, shepherd's purse, although near the coast, shepherd's purse can just about grow year round here where I live, near Salinas. Then there's annual bluegrass, which is very seasonal, tends to germinate and grow during the November through January, February period. It's pretty much done now and it's flowering. There's fiddleneck. It just finished flowering 6 weeks or so ago. Red stem fillery, you can still find it in the hills. Little mallow, which should be the state weed, it seems to be just about everywhere. And here is little mallow. Easy to classify. It has these heart-shaped cotyledons and then these palmate leaves. I mean, there are some native mallows which people plant as hedgerows, But this is little mallow, which is weedy and is a problem in vegetable fields and landscapes. And I've seen it in rainy winters, which of course we did not have, but I've seen it grow so tall it was blocking a stop sign, 7 or 8 feet in the air. So biennials, these are, you guys know what biennials are. So this is a basic thing. These plants live 14 to 2 years, 14 months to 2 years. There are a number of examples of biennial weeds. These tend to be fence row weeds or roadside weeds. There's bull thistle, which is a common pasture weed. It's places where you don't have tillage, you don't have cultivation. Wild carrot, common mullein, bristly ox tongue, which there's bristly ox tongue, a very common weed, at least in my neighborhood. Then there are perennials. There are 2 types of perennials. There's simple perennials, and then there are creeping perennials. And these are bad, and the creeping perennials, are the difficult ones, the most difficult. So simple perennials, things like dandelion, curly dock, buckhorn plantain, or broadleaf plantain. And then here are the really tough weeds, the creeping perennials. These guys live multiple years. Bermuda grass, Bermuda buttercup. This is the one that causes the problems for the artichoke growers because it has nutlets. Canada thistle, field bindweed, which is a horribly difficult weed to manage. Johnson grass, oxalis, which is this little tiny weed, which is really tough to control. Yellow nutsedge. So the simple perennial weeds, the things like dandelion, I'm going to use as the best example, they reproduce primarily from seed. Generally, they don't reproduce from roots. And usually in master gardeners, I get a question about somebody who has a lawn that's overrun with dandelion, and so they want to know what to do. And it's a mistake to go out and take a rototiller to it while the dandelion is still alive, because what you do when you take a dandelion root, here's the dandelion, and here is a root right here. You can chop that up, and if it's put into moist soil, chop it into 5 pieces. Guess what? You will get 5 dandelion. So that doesn't happen naturally. So when you dig this weed up, you have to get all of the roots. And this, incidentally, is from an old USDA weed manual. And it was published in 1970, and it's got all these hand-drawn weed pictures. So if you like weed pictures, it's a pretty cool book. But they're actually beautiful drawings, about 300 of them. So creeping perennials, these are the worst weeds. And if we were going to talk about herbicides, which we're not, that's really the best option for these, because these are, controlling these weeds, most of them requires many years and a lot of back-breaking work to get them under control. So let's look at the villains here. This is seemingly very innocent little creeping wood sorrel, oxalis. And there's about 40 different species of oxalis. But this is a very aggressive weed, and it reproduces by spreading rhizomes as well as seed. And it can actually has the capacity to shoot the seed. Little ejection of the seed can go like 10 feet or so. It's a real problem when you have pots in a greenhouse where you get oxalis in one pot and it shoots seeds that land in the other pots and quickly infests every single one of them. Drives people crazy. Bermuda grass, tough weed, drought resistant, can grow in places. It's growing in places in my little lot here where it never gets watered and this thing just survives. I don't know how it got there. I don't know how it can survive, but it does. Kind of like termites, live their whole life and never drink a drop of water. A mystery. Yellow nut sedge. So this is not a grass. A lot of people call this nut grass. It is not a grass. You are a sophisticated group of horticulturalists, so I don't have to explain to you guys that you need to know what species it is. Field bindweed. Want to buy this farm? You can get it cheap. This is obviously a real mess. Very aggressive weed. Field bindweed has the capacity to go so deep that it can tap the groundwater. It can easily go 20, have rhizomes, not rhizomes, but creeping roots that go 20 feet deep. And in Canada, in prairie soils, weed scientists long ago found field bindweed in Canadian prairie soils, which are quite mellow, going down as deep as 60 feet, 6-0. It's amazing. Classification. This is what I thought was probably a little bit basic for you guys, but I'll go through it quickly. There's 20,000 species of grasses. There are a lot of grass weeds, and to classify them, everything from bamboo to field corn to crabgrass, you got to know all of these terms so that you can differentiate them. Obviously, we won't spend much time on that. And so grasses are round, sedges are triangular. So this is a little bit of annual bluegrass, which tends to have kind of a square, the leaves kind of form this boat shape. Then this is Italian ryegrass, which actually has a very beautiful, brilliant green, glossy green underside, but it does this kind of a quirky little thing where it does this corkscrew emission, and it's classic grass in that it's round. All grasses are round. Broadleaves. So here's a wild radish as an example. Now, when we talk about control, if you want to use like a propane flame or an organic herbicide, it's much easier to control a broadleaf weed because the meristem, the growing point, is going to be like right there exposed. You don't want to wait till it gets this big. You want to do one that's much smaller. I'll show you an example. The grasses are much more difficult because the growing point stays in the ground for a long time. Sedges, again, this is the triangular version of what they are. Yellow nutsedge and purple nutsedge, which is a horrible weed. Places like Imperial Valley or Florida, it's horrendous. It's a tropical weed, basically. And it performs, yellow nutsedge does this, has these rhizomes with these tubers. And there's what the tubers look like. They're maybe 3/8 to 1/2 inch in diameter. And they have eyes on them, which are different sprouts. So a weed seed, like a pigweed seed, it has one embryo. And if you kill that embryo, that seed is dead. But on nutsedge, if you want to control it, what makes it so difficult is that this is a sprout coming off of one of the growing points, you pull that up and you don't get the tuber, then another one is going to, 2 or 3 weeks later, same thing's going to happen again from exactly the same tuber. It's a tough one. The yellow nutsedge, which you can find here, kind of has that yellow floret on it. It has seeds, but mostly they're not viable. It's got a good thing going with this tuber. It doesn't really need the help from the seed to propagate. So for cultural and physical controls, you need to know the life cycle because you're going to have a hard time with a hoe controlling field bindweed. Whereas a dandelion, if you dig it up, you can get it. If you get all the roots, you will win. Throw it on your driveway, drive on it, crush it, let it dry out, and you won. So for chemical control, for herbicides, which I'll say almost nothing about, you have to know the species, because if you look at an herbicide label, they list weed species, and you have to know, and herbicides are specific. So a few pictures of some weeds. Here's annual bluegrass, which I'm sure is very familiar to you. Tends to grow in the wintertime, really likes wet winters. When all the big guys sort of leave the field in the coldest days of the winter, shortest days, that's when annual bluegrass flourishes. Likes wet ground. Ripgut brome. This is a very common, at least here on the Central Coast. It's common, unfortunately, a lot of places. A few years ago, I had a man who, in the Carmel Valley, just west of me, who was very distraught. He was raising show dogs, very valuable dogs, and he had a whole bunch of brome on his property. And the seeds from these were getting in to the dog's eyes, eyelids, and he was costing him a lot of money to take them to the vet to have them plucked out. So he called me about April and said, I have a problem, what can I do? And I'm like, well, you needed to call me in November, October. It's too late. Wild oats. Here we are, wild oat. There's trillions and billions of wild oat plants growing in California. It's just about done. It's a winter annual. It does very well in the climate. It's a native of Morocco and Spain, Portugal. It germinates in the fall after it starts raining up in the hills, and it's setting seed right now. It's dropping to the ground, and it will hold up as seed throughout the summer, and it will go through its dormancy, the seed dormancy, and it will be ready to go come October. Hopefully we'll get a wet winter next year. Basics of weed management. So there's prevention, which the reason that we've been wearing masks, because pest management has a lot of commonalities with the basics of human health and animal health. We've been wearing masks to prevent the spread of COVID. It also works for flu, and that's why we didn't have a lot of colds and flu last winter, because people were preventing, they were washing their hands, they were wearing masks. But we'll get back to dealing with weeds. So prevention. Then there's eradication, which may work on the scale of a flower pot, where when you find a weed, you pull it up, and probably you can eradicate a weed from the scale of a flower pot. From the scale of agriculture, it's very, very difficult. What we tend to think of as control, that's basically pulling up that weed, I'm controlling it. There's management, which is a more systematic method of dealing with weeds. And this is really where we need to be, using prevention and control together to manage weeds and try to take advantage of the weak parts of weeds, because they do have weaknesses. They have some very big advantages in terms of making seed and propagating. So ways that you might want to think about preventing weeds is to buy clean garden soil, for example. Use clean seed and garden soil. So example, I've had to build a number of terraces in my yard because I have a rather hilly lot. And unfortunately, the garden supplier that I bought the soil from was careful about not letting weeds go to seed in his yard, his sales yard, and so I didn't have much trouble. Then there are things like composted chicken manure and yard waste, some of these are clean and some of them are not. But if you compost these organic materials, you get up to 150 degrees Fahrenheit, you will kill a lot of the weed seed. There are going to be probably some survivors, but you will get most of them. Then there's preventing weeds from reseeding. And this is easy to say and hard to do because weeds are really good at propagating. So if you can, again, this is easy to say, hard to do. Don't let weeds go to seed. This is prevention at its best. And this is really, these are the strong points of weeds. Like a lot of pests, think of rats and mice, think weeds, viruses. What do they do best? Propagate. Try to prevent them from doing that. Control methods for weed control. There's prevention. So we're talking about cultural methods, which these are the really pretty neat methods. Then there's mechanical and physical control, and you're going to recognize a lot of these. Then there's chemical, which I've always said about all I'm going to say about chemical control. So cultural control, promote your vigorous crop growth. Don't plant tomatoes in November in California. You probably want to plant them in March or April or May. That's when they're going to grow vigorously and compete with weeds. So well-adapted varieties that are adapted for the area, using transplants rather than seed. This is what organic growers tend to do because they don't have access to herbicides, and so they need all the help they can get. So transplants give them an advantage. Remember size. In a turf, in a lawn, mowing height. Mow at a proper height so that the grass isn't stressed. Because if you mow too short, you will stress the turf, and the weeds will invade. Also, the grass needs, it's a hard-working plant. It's trying to perform photosynthesis and take care of itself. And so if you mow it too short, you remove too much of the leaf so that it can't properly photosynthesize. Practicing sanitation, preventing weeds from going to seed. You're probably tired of me saying that. Don't bring in infested weed soils. Mechanical weed control. This is the old-fashioned stuff, but it works. Cultivation, tillage, rototiller, hoeing, pulling weeds. People have been pulling weeds for 10,000 years. You try to think maybe humorously that doesn't work very well. It does work. It's just that the weeds are so good at propagating that they come right back. There's flaming, there's mowing. So hoeing. This is a commercial field near my house. Salinas Valley lettuce. Mowing. This is a little late, but it is a weed control method. I mean, this guy has got, looks like crabgrass to me, already seeding. Might be too late, but that is a form of weed control. Hot water. You can kill a weed with hot water, really hot water. It basically cooks it. Then there's, this has become very common in Europe, and since Roundup has come under fire as after the carcinogen lawsuits, increasingly cities and even the University of California, who I work for, they don't want any Roundup on the campus. And so this is one of the things that we're looking at was the foam. So the reason they're using steam to cook the weeds, and the foam is sort of an insulation. It doesn't last, it lasts a few minutes. And so with heat cooking the weeds, it all happens, in a few minutes, 2 or 3 minutes. So a little bit of insulation, preserving the hot temperature, the hot water will improve weed control. Then there's flaming with a propane flamer. It works. makes a lot of noise. Not everybody likes to deal with a flame that's 2,000 degrees, but it works. So flaming isn't burning. People call these weed burners, but you can burn the weeds and it'll kill them, but you don't really need to do that. So here's a bunch of red root pigweed, and there's a grass weed right there, probably a Ceteria. And so notice these weeds, what they look like after 10 minutes after flaming. So you don't see any black charcoal in this picture. Basically, all it is you just need to but basically you hit a plant and a bunch of plant cells with a 2,000 degree flame. What happens is the cell membranes all break down. So it's kind of like the same thing that happens with a frost. Sensitive plants look pretty bad after a frost. They kind of change color. That's because all their cells have been burst with ice in them. In this case, basically the flame has melted the cell membranes and everything is scrambled eggs. So you don't have to burn. You can if you want to. It's your money, but you don't have to do that. So for mechanical recommendations for mechanical control, these are the easiest to control. I mean, once you chop an annual weed down, you get the root, it's done. You won, especially in the summertime. That's why it's best to do it on a hot day. Pull it up, it desiccates, it's over. Biennial weeds, can be killed in the same way, controlled in the same way. Simple perennial weeds, you can go out and dig up things like dandelion out of your lawn. If you get the roots, it will work. But creeping perennials are very, very difficult to control. For field bindweed, something that has roots, 10, 15, 20 feet in the ground, going out with a rototiller and tilling field bindweed to a depth of 6 or 8 inches. It's kind of, I say it's kind of like shaving, You shave today, the guys don't know this, you'll have to shave tomorrow. It comes right back. And that's exactly what the perennials are going to do. So physical weed control. I'm getting near the end of this, just a few more things, but this is the good stuff. Mulches. This is opaque material, so it blocks the sunlight. Weeds are hardworking plants. They need sunlight to perform photosynthesis. They don't get sunlight, they die. They starve. So they don't necessarily even germinate if they don't have the light signaling to them that it's okay to grow. So there's plastic mulches, there's gravel, there's bark, there's compost, there's straw, there's paper. People use all kinds of things. We don't use much newspaper anymore, but people have done that for years and years. So here's a typical landscape, something very familiar to you, where you go over top of a landscape fabric with a walk-on mulch like this. Very attractive, lasts for years. It's not completely weed-proof because in a normal wet year, you'll get some weeds growing on this. They'll take root in it. They won't last the summer, but if you want a nice, pretty landscape, you will end up going out and pulling them. Here's a agricultural situation. This is olives for hedgerow for olive oil. And I assume this is probably organic because they have put a fabric down. And this is rather expensive, but it will provide weed control for a number of years. So here's a strawberry situation. This is one of the experiments that we did. I had a graduate student working on this where we had different colors of plastic. And I'll tell you, cut to the chase, the dark colored plastics, the things like coffee colored and black, those are the ones that work the best. This white plastic right here is actually a black plastic. It's a 2-layer plastic. It has white on the surface. Why would you use a white plastic? If you want to plant strawberries in June or July, it's too hot if you use black plastic. So you use white plastic, which is cooler. Something you may do in your garden, an old technique, is how strawberries got their name. They put straw in the row. Here it is in carrots. Works very well, but you have to get it deep enough to block the light. So dark plastic mulches, they do the best. If you're going to use plastic, use a brown or black or a dark green. Then you can also use gravel or straw or bark. Use your imagination. There's a lot of things that will work. Gravel is not biodegradable, but all the rest of it is, all the organic materials. It has to be deep enough to block the sunlight to prevent photosynthesis. They also provide the benefit of reducing loss of moisture, which obviously this year, I'm sure you are quite aware, we need all the help we can get in guarding our soil moisture. I'm going to tell you one last technique before I let you go. This is called, in the Master Gardener Handbook for the University of California, it's called sprinkle, sprout, and spade. It goes by a number of names. People in agriculture would call it the stale seed bed. It's really a cool technique, and it works pretty well, and it's pretty reliable. So you prepare the area you want to plant. You water it, or if you're lucky, you get a timely rain. But you need moisture so that the weeds germinate. So this is fallow. We haven't planted anything. This is all before planting. So we water the area. And when the weeds come up, after we water, we're going to wait a week or two, depending on how warm it is and what species of weeds we're dealing with. And we could use a propane flamer. We can use a rake. We can use a lot of things. We can pull the weeds by hand if you want. But we're gonna use a very shallow intervention, cultivation, to kill those weeds. And if you really want to do an incredible job, you repeat the process. You water it again and repeat that. That's what organic growers who have time. This is the whole thing. This is the secret that the weeds don't want you to know. This is shepherd's purse, which is a very small seed. And shepherd's purse, the maximum that it can germinate is about 0.8 of an inch. So it's a small seed. It does not have the energy reserves in the seed to reach the surface. If it's germinates at 1 inch deep, it will die before it reaches the surface. The optimum is about 0.2, so 1/4 an inch approximately. So basically, if you have shepherd's purse and you till a 1/2 inch deep or even 1 inch deep, you'll get it. Pre-irrigation. So you till it and you can reduce the weed population. You stimulate them to emerge when you want them to come up. So I like this concept, and so I'm going to go over it in diagram form. So this is a raised bed. It can be flat. This will work. That's not important. This is sort of an agricultural scene. These are shallow weed seed, and this is shallow as well because it's close to the surface. These right here are deep. They won't bother us if we don't bother them. So we irrigate and we wait, and then we get our weeds sprouting and germinating. And then we can do a shallow tillage. We can do it with a rake. And what we have done, voila, is we've taken our own soil right in our own field or garden, and we're using it as a mulch. It doesn't look any different like I show in the picture, but basically this shallow area, we have partially depleted the weed seed. And this is what it looks like. You can get 50% weed control. I've done it, And we published that in a weed science journal. So this is, you have to compare it to no pre-irrigation. There's lettuce plant, a row of lettuce planted here. There's a row of lettuce planted here. Hard to see. Look at all the weeds. Over here, you go, well, hey, Fennimore, there's weeds there. I go, yeah. That's what 50% weed control looks like. Which would you rather deal with, that or that? With this, if you go in and cultivate and then you use a hoe, which is what growers would do, you can live with that. With this, you can't live with that. It's a mess. Cool system. So careful use of pre-irrigation and shallow tillage. The sprinkle sprout spade, it creates a shallow layer that's depleted of weed seeds. So I'm getting close to the end. Conclusions: use your cultural and mechanical weed control practices regularly. Don't let weeds go to seed if at all possible. Herbicides are very important for the deep-rooted perennials because they're really, there are ways to control them without the herbicides, but it's time consuming. Field bindweed could take you 4 or 5 years to clean up a field. Even with herbicides, it can take a couple of years. They're very tough. So that finishes what I'm going to tell you this evening. I was just in the city of weed last week and still is there. So am I seeing that there are 10 questions or something like that? Right? Is that right? I will stop share. How's that?
Okay, yeah, I see a couple of questions here. Well, Grace shared a link to edible wild food for information about some of the things you can eat, including shepherd's purse. Nancy wants to know if I do need to use an herbicide for bindweed, when during the life cycle is best?
Okay, so I understood shepherd's purse and something about, maybe repeat the question because I could barely hear you.
She wants to know if you use an herbicide for bindweed, when during the life cycle is it best to use it?
Okay, when it's flowering. Because what happens then if you use something like glyphosate and flowering, what's happening is the phloem is starting to send sugars down to the roots. It's basically getting ready to overwinter. And this is what a lot of perennials do. But for field bindweed, it's got a very nice indicator. It's flowering. And that's the time to do it. You will do, if you do like a 4% solution, you'll really knock it back a lot. But it won't eliminate it. That will take you this year, next year, and maybe maybe in 2023, you'll just have a cleanup, a few here and there, but it's not easy. If you do it by hand, which some people don't want to use glyphosate, you're looking at 4 or 5 year process. So another question?
Another question about vinegar for killing weeds?
About
Vinegar.
what sugar?
Vinegar.
Vinegar. Okay, yeah. The problem with vinegar is that you need a really high concentration. There are organic compliant vinegars, but they're like 20%. And it's very caustic. 20% acetic acid is, you're going to have to wear gloves that come up to your elbows. I'm not exaggerating on that. You're going to need face shield or goggles. You don't want to get the stuff in your eyes. You don't want to get it on your skin. Very caustic. It'll sort of work, but like for field bindweed, it would be the same thing as using a propane flamer. It just is going to burn the superficial area of the plant off. These are contact. All of the organic herbicides that we have on the market right now are primarily contact herbicides, meaning the same. You're all probably familiar with what a propane flame would do. So,
And then somebody wants to know about star thistle control.
star thistle. Well, there are, I'm not sure if homeowners can get this herbicide, clopyralid. The chemical, do they have a big area that they need to control?
Probably.
Yeah, there's an herbicide called clopyralid that works pretty good. It can be used in pasture, rangeland. That's one way to do it. A non-chemical way that I've heard, one of my colleagues who's now retired, what he did, he went into a rangeland and a place where they had water that they could irrigate, and he stimulated the weeds, the seeds of star thistle to germinate in like in the summertime. And so you irrigated it enough to wet the soil, like in July or something like that, stimulated them to grow, and then cut the water off, and the summer heat killed it. So he greatly reduced the population. So that's something that's sort of experimental. And obviously there's not enough water to do that in very many places. Another thing is, there's always goats. Goats, really true. They eat everything. They can eat poison oak. It's like somebody before, when I was invited to talk to your group, asked about poison oak. I think deer and goats must be closer related because they seem to eat about the same thing. They eat everything. The veterinary school at Davis fed some nanny goats poison oak foliage, and then they tested for the toxin in the milk, and there was no toxin. The goats had the enzymes in their system to digest it, so didn't hurt them a bit, and you could drink the milk. So anyway,
Great. Somebody asked about whether there's an insect that can be used. It's apparently in the experimental stage for star thistle.
Yeah, no, I that's biocontrol. Yeah, there's a group up in Albany, California, with the USDA, Lincoln Smith, who is an expert on this, and basically you have to be really careful about what insects to bring in, and that's careful. They study it for a number of years, but they have a number of insects that are releasing that, basically this is a wildland situation, rangeland. And I believe there's a couple of different insects. I honestly don't know much about that, but you probably, I can probably find the website, or I'm certain I could. In our book that we published by the California Weed Science Society, we do have a section. We do have a chapter in there that Lincoln Smith wrote about biocontrol, about use of insects, and there's some number of successes in California from 70, 80 years ago. There's a weed called Klamath weed, which pretty much has been eradicated, other than in a few high elevation places, by the chrysolina beetle, which just chews it up. So yeah, that for star thistle. Yeah, I think there's actually 2 insects. Yeah, so somebody commented. I'm just reading the comments. So
Somebody wanted to know about pink star thistle. A pink star thistle.
Oh, I haven't seen that.
Okay.
I've only seen yellow, but
There is a native pink thistle called the cobweb thistle. That's not what somebody's talking about, is it?
I think
Yeah,
it
it
was
could be.
pink star thistle. I think it was pink star thistle. It's in Crockett.
Yeah.
Okay.
But there's a number of thistles that that have reddish or pinkish flowers. I mean, bull thistle has a pink flower. It's like an Italian thistle that's actually got a fairly attractive flower.
This
It's
pretty
got-
much looked like yellow star thistle, but pink.
Okay, yeah, that's new. I haven't seen that one.
I hadn't seen it before either. I just went, oh.
Okay, and mutant, better get some of those seed. You might have something. Yeah,
Somebody also asked about organic weed control products such as fatty acids, salts of fatty acids.
just like, well, yeah, fatty acid. There's one product that I would recommend, and it is fatty acids, that's true. It's called Suppress. And that one, you know, I won't say it's really good. It's the best of the a lot that I know of right now. You know, I use some at a 9% solution. So what that means is, for sake of simplicity of math, it's a 91 gallons of water and 9 gallons of Suppress. So that's a 9% solution. You probably wouldn't mix up that much, but that's kind of what it works. And it will burn very small weeds. That's the thing about these organic. And just like the picture I showed you of the propane flaming of the pigweed, you need to do them small. They need to be less than 1 inch tall. And even that might be too big for some of them. So, but yeah, Suppress is the fatty acid, which is the best.
Yeah, I found that with flaming in my own yard. Plus, it's a better time of year to do it because it's usually in the early spring when it's wet, but you're less likely to catch anything on fire.
Yeah, now you get yourself in trouble with the local authorities. Yeah.
And somebody asked about dodder control. Is physical gathering the most effective control for dodder?
Oh, yeah. I honestly don't know. Dodder's tough parasitic weed. Basically need to get it before it sets seed. So basically, as soon as you see it, you know what. And I honestly don't know what would be the best way to gather it, but obviously get it to a place where you dry it out, get it off of the host plant, and so that it dies and dries out. But yeah, I have heard of people using a propane flame on it, and so they said it worked quite well. But obviously, it's probably getting too late to do that, too dry to do that now. But
About an effective control for oxalis, I assume they mean the yellow Sus Crespi.
yeah, that is something I did in my own lawn. I pretty well eradicated it with triclopyr. I was extremely happy with it. I did it last fall and it didn't come back.
Is that available to homeowners?
Yes, it is. I bought it at a garden shop. I didn't cheat.
Trade name?
Yeah, it's a triclopyr. There was like a Monterey chemical. I bought a tiny little, maybe a fourth of maybe 200 mils, a fourth of a pint, which cost $35, but it was amazingly, it worked very, very well. And the added benefit, if anybody has trouble with kikuyu grass, it controls kikuyu grass. I have pretty well controlled the kikuyu.
That's great. How about recommendations for control of Viola odorata in lawns?
Oh, you're talking about English lawn daisy?
No,
No, viola. Yeah, I don't know. I'm assuming that's a broadleaf viola.
Yes, it's broadleaf viola.
Yeah, you probably one of the phenoxy herbicides, like the 2,4-D, some of like the Scott's which has a mixture, has a weed and feed type. Then you can also buy a liquid if you want to spray it, but I would try that. I don't know. I'd have to look at the label to see if it controls that particular weed. For example, 2,4-D, the weed and feed will not control oxalis. Yeah.
How about a resource for pictures of weeds?
Pictures of weeds. Yeah, there's the University of California has a 2-volume set that Jody Tomaso wrote that has, I believe it's 900 and some species. There's a number of books. I have a list that I provide to the master gardeners. I can forward that to one of you, and you can distribute it to the group. It basically has a number of weed ID guides. But the UC extension offices, the county offices, all have them or can tell you how to order. You can go to. You don't have to go to the offices. Most of them are still closed, but you can go to the UCANR website, and they have other publications, and you can order it. I think it used to be about $50. I'm not sure what it is now. The oxalis herbicide, I
actually found it and I put it in, it's.
Yeah, yeah, that's.
I Googled it while we were talking.
Yeah, that's pretty close. Yeah.
I
Okay.
think that's it, unless anybody wants to unmute themselves and you have a question you want to ask.
All right.
Well, thank you. That's been a really educational, you have a very broad topic and you did a good job of covering it in a short
Oh,
period of time. So
We could talk about it all night.
I know you could, but thank you.
Yeah, somebody Carrie Parker put the ANR catalog. Okay. Fantastic. You got it.
That's where the pictures are.
All right. You guys are good. All right. Thank you. Bye-bye.
Thank you.
Bye, thanks.
Thank you, Steve. Good
Yeah.
talk.
Okay,
Thank
thank you
you.
all. Bye-bye.
I just wanted to say